Today, we've got Representative Ro Khanna of California's 17th District. And while he championed many progressive causes in the last few years, today we're going to focus on his economic philosophy and some changes to the legislative and judicial branch that have bipartisan support among the voters. I mean, the politicians probably aren't going to like him too much, Ro, but we will get into that. Welcome to Under the Desk.
I follow your clips, so I'm excited.
Now, you
I love
identify
the one where you were under the desk on one of them.
Yes,
I think
with your old pal, President Obama. Even we got him.
Well, now you made it into the big leagues.
I know. Now, you identify as a progressive capitalist and have called for a new economic patriotism as part of your governing philosophy. Could you just explain that to me like I'm five? What does that mean?
Progressive capitalism is very simple. It means you should be able to afford to live in America. Too many people can't afford to live in America because of the cost of living, healthcare, childcare, housing, education. And it basically says the government needs to provide these economic rights so people can afford those basic things to succeed in America. Economic patriotism means we've got to make more stuff in America. We've got to be more self-reliant. We have let so much of our manufacturing base leave the country. And we saw this in the pandemic. We didn't make baby formula. We couldn't have our cars get off some of the vacant lots. We didn't make enough steel. We've got to reindustrialize because that's going to bring good jobs to communities across the country.
Now, how would this philosophy apply to young voters? What does this mean for us?
But it's very concrete. I mean, talk to young folks about paying rent, and most people can't afford it. Talk about buying a home, that's out of reach. So if we had a real housing policy where we were building more rental units for mixed income, and we had tenant protections and rent couldn't go up higher than inflation, that would give a lot of young people housing options. We should have free college or free vocational education. That would make a huge difference for young folks. Childcare, so that young people who are even dreaming of having a family can think about doing that and still working or getting education. And then Medicare for all. I mean, that basically means you shouldn't be drowning in medical debt if you happen to go to the doctor or need to be in the hospital. So that it's basically saying young people have had the short end of the stick. The American dream isn't alive. They need these basic economic rights so that they can afford to live in America.
You talked a little bit just now about bringing things like steel and industry back to America. How would that factor in with supporting unions? We saw President Biden join the strike line with UAW, which was huge, first sitting president ever to do that. Where do you stand on your philosophy strengthening unions?
It is a huge part of progressive capitalism and economic patriotism. First, most of these good manufacturing jobs are going to be union jobs. They were traditionally union jobs. They're going to pay more. And by the way, they're great for climate because something like clean steel has 1/3 the CO2 footprint of the steel that's being made in China or that is using blast furnaces. So it's pro-labor, pro-environment. But I am most inspired by the labor movement. I was just in the district meeting with Starbucks workers who are organizing in my district, led by young folks who are right out of high school or some in college. And this is young people. I think it's after COVID. They're saying enough with these jobs that don't have basic health care, that don't have benefits, that are demanding crazy schedules. We want dignity in the workplace. And the labor movement is one of the big hopes of this country.
Now, you recently introduced a political reform resolution that presents as a comprehensive roadmap to achieving broad political reform in the judicial, everyone, and legislative branches of the U.S. federal government. Can you explain that to me one more time, like I'm five?
Okay, let's go point by point.
Yeah, let's go point by point.
First point, we should stop any PAC, lobbyist, super PAC money into politics. It is corrupting our politics. You've got big insurance companies, big oil companies, big pharma companies pouring money in PACs, lobbyists, super PACs, and that's why we don't get reforms that 70–80% of people want.
It's a problem, right? Because these PACs also identify as nonprofits, which makes you think like, oh, they must be charity organizations that are just supporting this politician. Not so much, though. This is a way to hide a lot of dark political money.
It's a way to hide it, and we've now shown on social media and with grassroots organizing that you can raise a lot of money without needing these PACs and lobbyists. So I've never taken PAC or lobbyist money. I started the No PAC caucus. I think we've got to get PACs and lobbyist money out of Washington. The second point is pretty simple. You shouldn't be allowed to go become a lobbyist after being a member of Congress. I mean, look, I sit on the Armed Services Committee. I shouldn't be allowed after my time is done to go be on the board of Raytheon or to be a lobbyist for Northrop Grumman and lobby my former colleagues. I mean, that's what erodes confidence in the system.
You're going to piss a lot of people off with that one, Ro, because that's a big part of being a politician, right? Is the life afterwards, is the writing a book, is the being a lobbyist, is the making millions of dollars on speaking tours and whatnot. Now, you also are advocating for 12-year term limits for members of Congress. Why 12 years when a congressional term is just 2 years?
Well, I thought 2 Senate terms, and then that would be 6 House terms. I'm open to the amount of time, but I think that's enough time to go make it impact. And people say, well, look, can't voters have the choice? The reality is when you become an incumbent member of Congress, it's very hard to beat them because you have name ID, you have financing. So we've seen in my state, in California, where we have term limits for the state legislature, we have a lot more young voters who are getting elected, women who are getting elected, voters of color who are getting elected, voters of the LGBTQ plus community. It's just opened it up. And I think it would be great to do that at the federal level.
You also talk about having a ban on members of Congress holding and trading individual stocks during the member's tenure. What about family members? Because speaking of your district in California, Pelosi, when asked whether lawmakers or their spouses should be prohibited from trading stock while in Congress, said, no, it's a free market. It would be unfair to restrict people. How are you going to get this past even some of the Democrats who want to be able to trade stocks or have their family trade stocks?
Well, I would say, look, it's created this huge perception issue, and we have a crisis. And it doesn't mean that people can't own stocks. All the bans still allow for trusts, blind trusts, diversified trusts that are independently managed. It just means that you shouldn't be sitting there making trades or telling your spouse to be making trades on daily information. Now, do I think most members of Congress are doing unethical things? I don't. I certainly don't think that about Speaker Pelosi, but there is this huge crisis of confidence in the public, and the way to address it is to say no trading, put it in a trust, let a third party manage it.
Speaking of lack of trust, let's move to your thoughts on the Supreme Court right now. Within your philosophy, there's space for reforming the Supreme Court, which hasn't been done in a super, super long time. Can you talk a little bit about having a code of ethics for the Supreme Court justices, because they don't have one right now?
They don't, and I don't understand this. I mean, they technically have one, but there's no disclosure required. I mean, look, if you were to come to the Capitol and say, Ro, I want to take you out for lunch, I'd insist on paying, because otherwise I have to fill out all these forms if you bought me lunch at like some good Indian restaurant. Yeah. Now, you know, you could go take the Supreme Court justices to Hawaii and they don't have to tell anyone. And I was like, in what world are they existing? I mean, the Congress is Article 1 of the Constitution. We can pass rules to say that the Supreme Court should have to disclose. And every federal officer in the executive branch, every person in the Congress, staffers have to follow this. You know, so the Supreme Court isn't aristocracy. They're not beyond the rules.
You really ought to tell them that, though, because they do tend to think that they have some sort of like omniscient power to be perfectly like prudent and like excellent judges, and they don't need any ethics, and we're doing just fine over here. Meanwhile, like going on exactly that, vacations with billionaires, and then suddenly.
And they're so out of touch for modern life. I mean, I think that's what makes people angry. Like, you have these justices who were appointed 30, 40 years ago, taking away women's right to control their own bodies. Like, they probably don't even know what it's like to be active and social in the modern America. They're cloistered into their totally isolated life, no accountability, and then they're flying around with billionaires for vacations and not telling the American public. It is a totally anti-democratic institution. And we've got to sort of strip the robes of these justices, not have this deference as if they are divinely inspired. I mean, they don't put out Donald Trump like God created me videos, but they definitely have that kind of vibe.
Pretty Pretty close. Pretty close. There's a lot of godlike behavior stuff going over there for sure. Now, the second part of this that I think, from what I've seen at least, has bipartisan huge support is the idea of a term limit for the appointments of Supreme Court justices, requiring a new justice to be added so that we keep it fresh, but saying, all right, there's no such thing as an appointment for life anymore. Maybe that worked back at the 1700s when the life expectancy was lower or something. But you're saying 18 years for a Supreme Court justice. That's a good steady amount of time to have that much influence over the laws.
18 years and then you're done. The Constitution says you have to be a judge for life. It doesn't say you have to be on the Supreme Court for life. So after 18 years, if they still want to be a judge, they can be on the circuit court. They could be on the district court. They could take senior status. They just can't be one of the 9 justices making decisions. And then it's constitutional. By the way, the founders, they thought you'd do the Supreme Court towards the end of your career. Life expectancy was in the 60s or 70s. You get appointed, you do a few years. They didn't think people would start gaming it by trying to put someone on the court at 42 to stay there till 90. So this is a total perversion of what the founders intended.
Now, would you keep it at 9? Like, in your perfect world, we're not, before people freak out, nobody is suggesting pack the courts. Nobody's suggesting add anything right now. We're just exploring the idea of a future, right? Would you keep it at 9, or do you think that we need maybe more justice as the population continues to grow and there's a little bit more diversity?
Look, I'm open to anything on the table, but I think that the Supreme Court justice term limits is a easier thing to get done. It's got 60-70% approval rating. And one of my favorite presidents, FDR, tried to expand the court and he was unable to do it. So, you know, I just have a degree of humility because he won 4 terms. So it's a hard thing to do.
That's true. Yeah, I do like this idea of term limits. I think it just makes it more fair for everyone. And like you said, we see it work at the state level. This isn't something we're guessing is going to work. This is something we know has direct and immediate impact. There's a lot of distrust in politics right now. What do you wish that your fellow Americans knew about what's going on in Congress when the cameras are off? Like, what kind of work is getting done, or is it really just a circus all the time up there?
I wish I knew how close we were coming to actually changing this place. You know, when I grew up, the idea, my parents couldn't meet a staffer to a member of Congress as Indian immigrants. Today, there are 5 Indian Americans in Congress. We've got Muslim Americans in Congress. We've got more women of color in Congress. We've got people from the LGBTQ plus community in Congress. We've got people now in Congress in their 20s and 30s. It's no longer just everyone in their 70s and 80s. And there's this energy. I think the best place actually to be serving is the House Progressive Caucus. There are all these young, exciting, dynamic members, people like Maxwell Frost, Greg Kizar. And what I want is more young people to get up and say, I want to run. I want to get to Congress. I want to get to the state legislature. Don't get discouraged. You know, Nelson Mandela once said, it always seems impossible until it's done. And we're actually much closer to having fundamental change in this country. We just need a few more people to join us.
I mean, look at some of the folks in Congress, people. Why not you? It could be you. You could give it a try, right?
Could be you, V. Could be you.
Could be me someday. Now, you rep Silicon Valley, the home of social media and things like AI. How do you suspect AI will play a role in our election this year?
I'm concerned. My biggest concern is AI basically makes it easier to generate memes that can go viral and to spread misinformation in a targeted way. And we don't have the legislative framework right now to address it. So it's going to be a lot of self-regulation by these companies. Now, they've hopefully learned their lesson of 2016, and I'm talking to them regularly to be clear that they've got to be vigilant about the misinformation and propaganda that we're going to see.
One of the biggest pieces of misinformation propaganda I see right now is a lot of bots in my comments, which is how I know it's not like an authentic thing. It's not like videos we're seeing as much as comments saying don't vote and trying to convince people that their vote won't matter or to boycott voting, sort of co-opting some of the union language that's very popular with young people. What are we? Cynical. Yeah. What are we doing to combat cyber misinformation and disinformation attacks on social media?
Well, again, the challenge is it's got to be these companies having these standards. And
Yeah.
the challenge of it is the First Amendment, right? You have to be so careful from a federal perspective to regulate because you don't want to regulate dissenting speech. And so there's a trade-off between how do you allow these platforms to be open and robust, and how do you make sure that it's not spewing hate or misinformation. I do think Congress needs to have regulation that creates a standard saying incitement to violence, hate speech, a blatant misrepresentation is not allowed. But in the absence of that, coming to this election, that's going to be something that standards that the industry is going to have to adopt.
Do you think we'll see another TikTok congressional hearing this year? Should I keep my suit dusted off?
You're not going to be banned, V. That take that prediction from me. I mean, you could. I guess you won't be able to play it on TikTok if I looked up. But the idea that they're going to ban TikTok with millions of Americans talk about a mutiny in this country. But I have concerns in terms of making sure the data is properly secure, that it's not getting to the wrong hands. But I think your following is only going to grow. I mean, whatever it is only going to get higher. I don't know if you can get more.